The last Apache woman sold for $6 until a broken stranger set her free. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty plains of Arizona. The sound of hooves clattered across the earth, each step echoing the silence of the wild, untamed land. The wind whipped through the dry grass, sending ripples across the horizon. But amidst the peaceful beauty, there was a sense of unease, like a storm ready to break. In the small town of Broken Arrow, life moved slowly, as it always did. But today was different. Today the town square was bustling with activity, the air thick with tension. A man on horseback rode into town, his face hidden beneath the brim of his hat. His name was Charlie Blackwood, a drifter with a haunted look in his eyes. He wasn't a man to make waves, but the moment he entered the town square, all eyes were on him. Charlie had heard whispers on the wind about the last Apache woman, a captive, a slave. Her name was Nayeli. She had been sold like cattle, her fate sealed by the greed of men who saw her as nothing more than a possession. She was to be sold at the market, her worth measured in silver. $6 was all it took to buy a life, to buy a woman's freedom or captivity. Charlie's heart tightened in his chest as he made his way toward the square, the stories of Nayeli echoing in his mind. She had been taken from her people, her tribe, slaughtered by men who thought nothing of the lives they destroyed. The Apache were a proud people, but the white man's greed had reached its ugly fingers into their lives. The woman's fate had become the price of survival for the few that remained. As Charlie approached the town square, he saw her. Nayeli stood tall, her eyes defiant, her spirit unbroken. She was bound by heavy chains, her hands clasped together in front of her. Her long black hair, braided tightly, hung like a dark curtain down her back. She stood before a group of men, all eyes on her, and she knew what was coming. She had been sold before, many times, and each time her hope grew dimmer. She had no choice but to accept whatever came her way. But today, something was different. The stranger who had ridden into town was different. He wasn't like the others. Charlie dismounted from his horse and walked up to the crowd. He could feel their eyes on him, but he didn't care. His gaze was fixed on Nayeli. He didn't know why, but something inside him urged him to help her. She was different, too. Her strength, her dignity, it all radiated from her. She was not the broken woman they thought her to be. One of the men in the crowd looked Charlie up and down, sizing him up. "You here to buy a piece of land, stranger?" he asked, his tone mocking. Charlie didn't answer right away. He glanced over at Nayeli, her eyes still locked on him, but her face was unreadable. $6, the man said, pushing the price up in the air like it was a game. "That's all she's worth. Take her or leave her." $6? It was an insult. A life shouldn't be worth so little. But what could he do? He was a drifter, a man with nothing but the clothes on his back and the dust in his boots. He had no silver to spend. But something told him that this was his moment. He stepped forward, his boots crunching the dirt beneath him. "I'll take her," he said, his voice low but firm. The man raised an eyebrow. "You got $6, stranger?" Charlie shook his head. "No." The crowd fell silent, the tension in the air thickening. The man stared at Charlie, disbelief creeping into his eyes. "You think you can just walk in here and take her without paying?" "I don't care about the silver. I'll take her if you let her go." The man looked around, perhaps expecting someone to intervene, but there was only silence. Nayeli's eyes flickered, a spark of hope igniting in her heart. She didn't know who this man was, but something in his voice made her believe that he might be different, that he might be the one to finally set her free. The man grunted, annoyed by the situation. "Fine," he spat. "Take her, but it'll cost you more than you think." Without a word, Charlie stepped forward, unchained Nayeli, and helped her down from the platform. Her wrists were raw, her skin irritated from the tight bonds, but she didn't care. She was free. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe. Charlie led her away from the crowd, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Nayeli glanced up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. She didn't know this man, didn't understand why he had come for her, but there was something about him that felt right. "I'm Charlie," he said, his voice rough, as if he hadn't spoken in days. Charlie Blackwood. "Nayeli," she whispered. The two of them walked together, the sun beginning to dip behind the hills, casting the world in an amber glow. It was a moment of peace, a moment of freedom, but it wouldn't last long. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers and challenges, but for the first time in years, Nayeli had hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was someone who would fight for her, someone who would set her free. And Charlie? He had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. He couldn't turn back now. He had made a choice, and for better or worse, he was going to see it through. They both had their scars, their wounds, but together they might just have a chance to heal. The air was thick with dust as Charlie and Naeli rode through the plains, their horses kicking up clouds of dry earth beneath their hooves. The sun had almost vanished beyond the horizon, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. They had left Broken Arrow behind, but the echoes of the town's cruel market still lingered in Charlie's mind. He had freed Naeli, but that wasn't the end. They were still at the mercy of the wilderness, and in these lands, mercy was a rare commodity. Charlie had no plan. He was a drifter, a man who had spent more nights than he could count sleeping under the stars, and he never stayed in one place for too long. He had no home to offer her, no promises of safety, only the shared path ahead, but there was something about her strength, something that spoke to him deep inside, urging him to protect her at all costs. Naeli, for her part, was quiet. She had been a captive for so long that silence had become her refuge. The sound of the wind through the grass, the faint rustle of the horse's mane, these were the only things she knew for certain now. Her life had been a series of cold, harsh days, each one blending into the next until she lost track of time. The hope that Charlie had given her felt fragile, like a small flame flickering in the wind. She wanted to believe in it, but her past had taught her that hope could be cruel. They camped under the open sky that night, a small fire crackling between them. The horses grazed nearby, their gentle snorts the only sound breaking the silence. Charlie sat on a rock, his back against a boulder, staring into the fire. His mind wandered, trying to make sense of what he had done. He had acted on instinct, not thought. But instincts sometimes were all a man had left. Naeli sat across from him, her back straight as she stared into the fire, her face unreadable. The flames danced in her dark eyes, casting flickering shadows on her skin. Charlie couldn't help but watch her. There was something about her, her strength, her quiet resolve, that he couldn't ignore. She had been through so much, and yet she carried herself with a dignity that made her seem untouchable. "You don't have to thank me," Charlie finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was gruff, as if the words themselves had to fight their way out. Naeli didn't respond at first, as though the idea of thanking someone was foreign to her. After a long pause, she spoke softly, almost as if speaking to herself. "I've been sold before. Many times. Each time I learned to say nothing, to do nothing, because it didn't matter." Charlie's brow furrowed. He had no idea what it was like to live through something like that, to be treated like property, like an object to be traded. He didn't have the words to say anything that would make it better, but he wanted to say something. Anything. "It matters now," he said, his voice steady. "You're free now. I'll keep you safe, as long as I can." Naeli glanced at him, her dark eyes searching his face for any hint of doubt. She found none. For a moment, something inside her softened. She had never known anyone who had given their word so freely. Maybe it was foolish, but in that moment she believed him. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice quiet, still guarded. Charlie hesitated, looking up at the endless stretch of land before them. He had no answer. He didn't know where they were going. The world felt so wide, so empty. There were no maps, no safe havens out here, just a vast wilderness full of danger, where man's only chance of survival was knowing how to fight and knowing when to run. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I'll find a place where you don't have to hide anymore." Naeli nodded, though doubt lingered in her eyes. She didn't say anything more, knowing that the journey ahead would be long, and they would both need to be strong. The night passed slowly, and the stars above them seemed as distant as the world they had left behind. The fire burned low, and the horses shifted in their sleep, but neither Charlie nor Naeli could find rest. Charlie lay back on the ground, his coat wrapped around him like a blanket. He had been in plenty of tough spots before, but this was different. This woman was different. The next morning they packed up and continued their journey. Charlie led the way, his eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. The wind howled across the plains, carrying with it the scent of dust and something else, something faintly dangerous. Naeli rode beside him, her expression still unreadable, but she seemed more at ease today. The silent bond between them was slowly growing, and although neither of them spoke about it, both could feel it. She didn't know if she could ever repay the debt she felt she owed Charlie. Maybe she could never repay him, but for now, that didn't matter. All that mattered was the road ahead. As they rode, they came upon a small creek, its waters clear and cold. Charlie slowed his horse, taking the opportunity to drink and rest for a moment. Nayeli followed suit, her gaze drifting toward the water. For the first time in days, she felt the weight of the past lift, even if just for a moment. She bent down, cupping her hands to drink from the creek, the cool water soothing her parched throat. "Thank you," she said suddenly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Charlie, who had been watching her, nodded. "No need for thanks." But Nayeli shook her head. "I never thought I would see freedom again. I never thought I would feel the wind on my face or the earth beneath my feet without chains." He didn't know what her life had been like before he had found her, but he could see the scars, both the ones on the outside and the ones hidden deep inside. "It's not much," he said, his voice low, "but it's yours. The world's a big place. We'll find somewhere for you to live without fear." Nayeli looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. She didn't know what the future held, but in this moment she was free, and that she realized was enough for now. Days passed as Charlie and Nayeli journeyed through the rough, unforgiving landscape of the Arizona desert. The sun was a constant companion, a fiery orb that beat down relentlessly, turning the ground beneath them into a scorching expanse of dry, cracked earth. They traveled by day, resting by the scant shade of the few scattered trees when the sun reached its highest point. At night, they slept beneath a canopy of stars, the cool air a welcome relief from the heat of the day. Charlie kept his distance, speaking little, but always staying close enough to ensure Nayeli's safety. She, in turn, seemed to have grown more comfortable in his presence. While still silent and reserved, her eyes had softened, the deep wariness that had once defined her now giving way to something akin to trust. Charlie had known that freeing Nayeli from her chains had been only the first step in what would likely be a long, hard journey. But he hadn't known how much it would weigh on him. He had lived for years without the need to care about anyone other than himself. But now, with Nayeli beside him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was responsible for her well-being. The weight of that responsibility was heavy, more than he had expected. But he wouldn't leave her, not now. One evening as they set up camp by a small river, Charlie noticed that Nayeli was quieter than usual. She had been looking out at the river, her dark eyes distant, as though lost in thought. He set down the bedroll and sat beside her. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice gentle, though he wasn't sure if he was truly ready to hear the answer. Nayeli hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of the riverbank. For a moment she said nothing, and then finally her voice broke the silence. "I don't know where to go." Charlie's heart tightened. He had expected something like this. After all, Nayeli had been taken from her homeland, sold into captivity, and had no family left. Where could she possibly go? What place could ever feel like home after everything she had been through? "You don't have to decide right now," Charlie said, trying to offer some comfort. "We'll keep moving, and when the time comes, we'll figure it out together." But Nayeli shook her head, her expression uncertain. "I've been lost for so long. I don't know if I can ever be found again." He could understand that feeling, the loss of home, the loss of self. It was something that haunted many men and women, especially those like him who had wandered for years without purpose. "You're not lost anymore," he said. "Not to me." Nayeli looked up at him then, her dark eyes meeting his. For the briefest moment, something passed between them, something unspoken but understood. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something else. Something that made the weight of the journey ahead feel a little more bearable. Charlie's words seemed to settle something inside her. She had spent so many years feeling like a shadow, like a thing to be owned, to be traded. But with Charlie, she felt like a person again. A woman with her own future, her own choices, even if she didn't know what those choices were yet. The next few days brought with them more challenges. As they traveled deeper into the desert, food and water became scarcer. The horses began to slow, their coats dulling with exhaustion. The sun's heat seemed to suck the very life out of the land, and Charlie began to worry that they might not find a way out of this barren stretch of desert. One morning, Charlie woke to find Nayeli sitting by the fire, staring at the horizon. Her face was drawn, her eyes tired. She hadn't said anything, but he knew that she, too, felt the weight of the journey. "How are you holding up?" he asked, crouching down beside her. Nayeli looked up at him, her face solemn. "I've been through worse," she said simply. Charlie didn't doubt that. But he also knew that survival wasn't just about enduring. It was about hope. And he wasn't sure if Nayeli had that hope anymore. He could see it in the way she walked, in the way her shoulders slumped when she thought no one was watching. They continued their journey, though, moving on despite the growing fatigue. Each day was a struggle, but Charlie kept his focus on the road ahead. He knew that stopping would only make things worse. They had to keep moving, or the desert would swallow them whole. Then one afternoon, as they reached the crest of a hill, they spotted something in the distance, an oasis, a small patch of green in the otherwise barren desert. It wasn't much, but it was a sign of life. Charlie pushed the horses toward it, urging them forward with renewed energy. When they arrived, they were greeted by the sight of a small stream surrounded by palm trees. The water was cool and clear, and the grass beneath their feet was soft. For the first time in days, Charlie allowed himself to relax. He dismounted, then helped Nayeli down. She took a few steps toward the water, dipping her hands into the stream. She hadn't realized how thirsty she was until the coolness of the water touched her skin. Charlie watched her for a moment before turning to tend to the horses. As he worked, he couldn't help but think about the strange sense of peace that had settled over them in this place. For a brief moment, it almost felt like they were at home. Later, as the sun began to set, the two of them sat by the water, the soft rustling of the palm fronds above them the only sound. Charlie looked over at Nayeli, her dark eyes reflecting the colors of the sky. "I think this is the closest we'll get to a real rest," he said with a half-smile. "We'll need to keep moving soon, but we've earned this." She seemed to be lost in thought, her gaze distant again, but Charlie didn't push her to talk. He had learned that silence was sometimes the only way to hear someone's heart. "Do you think we'll ever be free of this desert?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Charlie paused, considering her words. "I think we're already free," he said slowly. "We're not trapped anymore. We're just traveling. Searching for something, maybe, or maybe it's not something. Maybe it's just about finding peace, wherever it is." Nayeli's eyes met his again, her gaze softening. "Maybe that's all I need." Charlie nodded, but deep down he knew that both of them were searching for something more. Not just peace, but a place where they could truly belong, where the weight of their pasts wouldn't follow them. But for now, this oasis, this small moment of calm, was enough. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to keep them going. The next morning, the oasis was still as peaceful as it had been the night before. The sun was rising over the horizon, casting soft golden light across the water. The air was cool, a welcome change from the scorching heat they had grown accustomed to. The gentle sound of the stream and the rustling of the palm fronds were the only sounds that filled the air. It was the kind of place that made you believe, if only for a moment, that the world wasn't so harsh. Charlie had woken early, the rising sun pulling him from his dreams. He sat near the water, running his hands through the cool, clear stream. His mind was clouded with thoughts. The journey so far had been grueling, but it was clear now that they had come far from the cruel market where he had first laid eyes on Nayeli. She was free now, but freedom had its price. It didn't come without its challenges. And those challenges were just beginning. Nayeli, too, had awoken early. She was sitting quietly by the edge of the water, her dark eyes fixed on the rippling surface. She had learned to find peace in silence, in moments like these, when the world felt still enough to listen. The night before, Charlie had spoken of peace, of finding a place to belong. But deep down, Nayeli felt an emptiness. She had never had a place to call home. There had always been a sense of displacement, of never truly being where she belonged. Even now, as the desert stretched out before them, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Charlie stood up and walked over to her, his boots crunching on the soft earth. "We should get moving soon," he said, his voice low. "We can't stay here forever." She didn't know if she was ready to move on. She wasn't sure where she was going or where they would end up, but she also knew that staying here forever wasn't an option. "Where will we go?" she finally asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Charlie paused for a moment, his gaze drifting over the horizon. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But we'll figure it out, one step at a time." She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. She had grown used to living in uncertainty, but something about Charlie's calm demeanor made her feel like they could face whatever came next together. They spent the rest of the morning preparing to leave. They packed their meager belongings, checked their horses, and filled their water skins. Despite the stillness of the oasis, the weight of the journey ahead seemed to press down on them. The desert was vast, and they had no way of knowing what lay beyond the next hill. Charlie mounted his horse and waited for Nayeli to do the same. She hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the oasis. It had been a small but important piece of peace in their chaotic journey, and leaving it felt like another step into the unknown. As she mounted her horse, Charlie gave her a reassuring nod. "We'll keep moving west," he said. "There's a town a few days' ride from here. We'll find shelter there, maybe even work if we have to." She had never truly known what it meant to live without fear, without the constant threat of being sold or captured. The thought of settling in a town, even for a short while, was foreign to her. But it was better than the endless wandering they had been doing. They rode through the desert, the sun climbing higher in the sky as the day wore on. The heat grew unbearable, but Charlie kept a steady pace, urging their horses onward. Nayeli followed closely behind, trying to keep her thoughts focused on the road ahead. It was late in the afternoon when they saw something in the distance, a plume of dust rising into the sky. Charlie's eyes narrowed as he studied the sight. "There's a caravan ahead," he said. "Could be traders, or maybe travelers." Nayeli's heart skipped a beat. They had been alone for so long, just the two of them. The thought of encountering others filled her with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. She didn't know if she was ready to face the world beyond the small circle of their companionship. As they drew closer, Charlie slowed his horse, eyeing the caravan with caution. The last thing they needed was trouble. The desert was dangerous, and the people who traveled it were not always kind. The caravan consisted of several wagons, drawn by oxen, and a group of men and women walking alongside. They appeared to be traveling through the desert, headed for a destination unknown. Charlie and Nayeli approached slowly, making sure they didn't appear threatening. One of the men from the caravan noticed them and waved. Charlie lifted his hand in acknowledgement, but didn't stop. The last thing he wanted was to get caught up in a conversation with strangers. But as they passed by, a voice called out to them. "You there? You two travelers?" Charlie stopped his horse, his instincts telling him to be cautious. He turned to face the man who had called out. He was tall, dressed in dusty clothes, and had a look about him that suggested he had spent a lifetime in the desert. "Travelers," Charlie said cautiously. "We're just passing through." The man studied him for a moment, then glanced over at Nayeli. "You sure you two are okay?" he asked, his gaze lingering on her. "You look like you've been through a lot." Charlie's protective instincts flared, and he stepped forward, blocking the man's view of Nayeli. "We're fine," he said firmly. "Now, if you don't mind, we need to keep moving." The man's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded and stepped back. "Ain't no harm meant, just thought you might be in need of supplies." Charlie didn't trust this man, but he couldn't afford to get into a fight either. He gave a curt nod. "We're fine, thanks." With that, he turned his horse around, urging Nayeli to follow. As they moved away from the caravan, Charlie could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea who these people were, and he wasn't about to take any chances. But as they continued their journey, Nayeli couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The way the man had looked at her, it wasn't kindness. There was something in his eyes that unsettled her. She had seen that look before, the look of someone who saw her as nothing more than a possession. Charlie noticed her silence but didn't press her. He knew she had a lot on her mind, and he wasn't going to force her to speak if she wasn't ready. As the day turned to evening, they found a quiet place to camp for the night. Charlie set up the fire while Nayeli tended to the horses. The silence between them was comfortable, though both of them knew the dangers of the world around them. After a long day of riding, they sat down to a simple meal of dried meat and water. As they ate, Charlie couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter with the caravan had been more than just a chance meeting. He had a sense that trouble was following them, that the world they were trying to escape wasn't going to let them go so easily. But for now, they were safe. And that was all they could hold on to. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, Charlie looked over at Nayeli, who was staring into the fire. She had come a long way since he had first met her in that cruel market. She had survived so much, and though she was still scarred, she was stronger than she knew. They both knew the road ahead was uncertain, full of dangers and challenges, but together they could face whatever came next, and for the first time in a long while, both of them felt like they had a chance.